How's it going, everybody? The Cello Joker's back, and it is time to go over the best and worst of each character objectively based on their stats. Now, with the addition of Arle, the final character in the wave of DLC we've gotten has now concluded. Because of this, I decided that I wanted to make this video, and I'm going to be objectively rating each character based on their stats. This is not going to take into consideration double ring engine, not going to take into consideration ultimate charge, anything like that. It is going to take into consideration how the meta has shifted with the nerfs of ultimate charge and the newly added ring engine gadgets, but I do not want to directly influence everything based on the ring engine gadgets. I want them to be kind of based on just overall how the character stats are in general. Now, does this mean that the characters that are in the best and worst are going to be the best and worst with DRE? More than likely, yes, they will. Now, in general, though, I want to talk about the best and worst of each class because I thought it'd be really interesting and I thought it'd be a really fun topic. Just because a character is the best or the worst of the class does not mean that you should stop using that character, especially if you like him. Again, character stats are not the most important thing in the game. They do matter a bit, but not nearly as much as the vehicle choice you have, the vehicle stats of the vehicle choice, your gadget loadout, your map knowledge, and your overall skill at the game. There's a lot more factors to this game that matter significantly more than just character stats, so keep that in mind. But without further ado, let me quickly talk about the 5 stats in the game. So, in the last patch of patch 1.2.1, the 5 best stats in order were boost, if I remember correctly, it was speed, handling, power, acceleration in that order, or it was boost, handling, speed, power, acceleration. It was one of those 2 setups. In this version of the game, I would argue that power has improved quite a lot. Speed actually as a stat is weighted a little bit less. So what's going to end up happening is boost is still going to be weighted as a 1, which is what I'm going to weight all the boost at for every character is at a 1. This means that it's the most important stat in the game by far. Next, handling I want to weight at about a 0.4. Now, I know I could go with 0.5, but I'm choosing 0.4 because I shifted some of the weights of each of the stats based on from last patch to this one, because power actually matters more now. So because of that, power actually becomes a more important stat to actually take into consideration, because in bump wars you lose a lot of rings, and especially when you're using double ring engine, if you lose rings, especially when you don't have a ton of power, it'd be very hard to maintain double ring engine very consistently. So power does have a little more value, but handling, speed still matter way more. So handling will be about at a 0.4. That gets shifted to power, which is going to be weighted at about a 0.2. Speed is going to be weighted at about 0.25, and then finally acceleration is going to be weighted at 0.01. Because acceleration, unfortunately, it does not matter in this game. Acceleration as a stat is pretty bad overall. Even if I weighted acceleration differently, all the characters that are in the current spots that they're in probably are still going to stay in the current spots. Now, without further ado, let's get into the best and worst of the speed characters. So, I do have objective stats. I won't show those just yet, but I would like to talk about why some of these characters are better or worse for my personal reasons. So, in last patch, we knew Blaze and Shadow were definitely 2 of the top dogs before characters like Red, Proto Man, the Ghost, and Knights were added. Why is that? It's because they have 20 speed and they had 9 boost. This was very important. Now, the big thing is that they have the lowest handling of the class and they have the lowest power of the class. This makes it to where they're very fast, but they do get beaten in bump wars. This didn't matter though, because they're very good time trial characters, and in general, they were very solid with ultimate charge if you want to use them with ult charge, or they were just good enough with their base power to work with power machines, so it didn't really matter too much. But unfortunately, with the shift towards double ring engine, because handling vehicles and sometimes E-gears are the preferred choice, this lack of power and this lower handling, but the lack of power actually does matter now. So because of this, they actually are going to be bumped significantly more often, and they're going to lose more rings significantly more often. Because of this, they're going to have a significantly harder time actually not only maintaining rings consistently, but also out power bumping other racers. That's why characters like Red and Proto Man having 10 boost, even though they lose a little bit of speed, their higher power and handling naturally actually will help them to be better characters overall for online play. But for time trial, obviously, Shadow and Blaze are still probably going to be the best in terms of time trial. Now, when it comes down to it, if we want to be very nuanced, technically Proto Man Red might be slightly better depending on certain things. Maybe Shadow Blaze are better in certain things. I think in general, when it comes to the game, I'm not going to talk about time trial as in like ranking each character based on their time trial results, because if I did, Blaze and Shadow would still be the best characters in the game, arguably, because of that. So we're going to skip over that. We're going to talk just objective stats, and based on the objective stats and the weights that I have, Red and Proto Man are actually going to be the best characters of the patch. Now, it's going to be kind of hard to see this, so I'll have to probably zoom this in. The big thing with this, because the Red and Proto Man actually have so much boost, power, and handling compared to Shadow, the speed that they lack compared to Shadow and Blaze actually doesn't matter nearly as much. So because of that, Proto Man and Red are actually pretty solid characters for that reason, and they're very consistent for that reason in World Match. And having more power helps a lot. That's why Knights and Ghosts are so high. The fact that these characters have so much power on them actually helps them to win power wars. The only character in this class that has more power than Knights and Ghosts is legit Espio and Metal Sonic, but Espio and Metal Sonic have significantly less boost and have nearly the same speed if you're in Espio's case, or more speed in Metal Sonic's case, but that speed doesn't really translate out to anything. So because of that, Red and Proto Man are actually very good overall, and they're very consistent. Red and Proto Man, and especially Red, since Red is a free character, is probably going to be the best of the class, whereas Metal Sonic is unfortunately still going to be the worst of the class. Even though Metal Sonic, again, we'll go back to the stats, even though Metal Sonic has really high speed, it doesn't really translate out really well because he has very low boost, and boost is the best stat in the game. You need to have high boost to actually make anything happen, and a lot of the times, with or without DRE, having low boost and having barely any higher speed and handling doesn't really help, and that boost can translate out more, because remember, drift boosts are your consistency. Without that consistency, you're going to struggle a lot more. That's why it's better for Red and Proto Man having higher boost. This helps them quite a lot more. Now that we've gone over the speed characters and we've talked about them, we have Red is their best because he's a free character. If it wasn't for the fact that he's free, Proto Man also would be in here, but I'm going to try to rank all the free characters and just talk about any of the paid characters. I won't put Proto Man in here because it'd just be a duplicate because they have the exact same stats. So let's move on to the acceleration class. With the acceleration class, with the addition of Majima himself and Tangle, we have a couple new tiers of boost. So the main tiers were 5 and 7. Now we have 6 and 8. So because of this, Majima has 8 boost, which automatically puts him in a bracket of his own that's above everyone else. The big thing is that he has 13 speed, and you might be thinking, well, this is really bad. 13 speed sucks. Here's the thing. On average, most of these characters will not get another point of speed compared to the speed characters, which will almost always get a point of speed, because the acceleration character's third best stat is power. Their second best is usually speed, right? Even with the fact that their second best stat is speed, they usually won't get another point of speed on average. And even if they did, the boost, again, boost is very important here, and because Majima has really good handling as well, this helps him quite a lot compared to a lot of the other characters. Imagine using the ring engines, and all of a sudden you don't have rings. Now Majima's overall consistency with his stat line does help him a lot. Now, one thing that does make Majima worse is obviously his power stat is really low. Because his power span is so low compared to the other acceleration characters, he does get bullied more. So he's a little bit slower and gets bullied more, but he has much higher boost and much higher handling, which helps him quite a lot, and those are two of the most important stats in the game still by far, even in this patch. Even with the fact power and speed are around 2.5 and 2 respectively, Majima still is on top here as arguably the best acceleration character in the game based on the acceleration class's stats, with Sage and Charmy very shortly behind one another, and then you have Creeper right below Charmy. Unfortunately, Nine and Tails are sadly the worst characters in this class based on raw stat data. Now again, my weights are going to be different than other players, but the big thing that makes Tails and Nine so bad is they have 5 boost, they have 7 handling, they have very low in both those stats. It's nice that they have 15 speed, and it's nice they have 13 power, but because they have so much acceleration, their dump stat is acceleration, unfortunately, because that's the class. They give them a lot of the better stats for worse stats, unfortunately. So that is why they're so bad, and unfortunately, that is why 9 is going to be the worst, whereas Majima is going to be the best acceleration character. I'm putting 9 here because I like Tails a little more than 9, even though 9's pretty cool. But for the most part, Tails and 9 have the same stat line, so just like Red, I'm not going to put both of them in here just to keep things consistent. But Majima having the highest boost of the class makes him arguably the best acceleration character, easily by far, and it's very unfortunate for the other characters in the acceleration class. Moving on to the handling class, as you see, the newly added Arle is here. She has some really good stats. She has 14 boost, so she's tied with II, but gains 1 speed and 1 power over II, and actually sacrifices 1 acceleration and 1 handling to get that. Now, losing 1 handling is bad, but losing 1 acceleration to gain 1 speed and 1 power is really good. Although handling does weigh a little bit more, the fact that she gains 1 speed and 1 power actually makes it a lot better for her, and II was arguably the best handling character because of his stat distribution. And now with Arle in the game, Arle is actually going to become your new best character just by a tiny margin. Amy and Rusty are very close to be, they were very, very close. Like the margin of difference here is literally within 0.05. So as you can tell, there's a very, very tiny margin of difference here, but because of Arle having slightly better stats when it comes to how they're distributed, it actually makes Arle your best handling character in the game by far. And in terms of Joker being the worst handling character, this makes a lot of sense. Joker has the lowest boost of all the handling characters, so he's already docked 3 points on average. Not only that, he literally dump stats 3 power, loses 2 to 3 boost. He does have 7 speed, and his acceleration isn't the worst, but because he's dump statting so so much into power, he's actually sacrificing a lot of potential for boost. So this does make Joker the worst handling character easily. And the thing is that even though his handling is really high, and it's really nice for that, since all the characters in this class have really high natural handling, it doesn't really translate out as much as, like, say, having naturally high boost, which is what Arlay and II have. So because of that, they have better boost, which translates much better than having more handling or less handling. So you will barely feel the difference of the handling between these characters, but you would definitely feel the boost more than likely. So unfortunately, because of that, Joker is going to be your worst character in terms of handling, whereas Arlay is going to be your best handling character just on stats alone. Before we get into the power character stats, I would like to talk about the boost character stats. And after weighing the stats, I think it's pretty obvious that Whisper is going to be your best character. Now, the reason why Whisper is the best character, it should be really obvious. It's the fact that she has 19 boost. Having 19 boost is very, 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 very important. 19 boost is easily the highest in the game, and she does have less acceleration, which is good. She has more handling, which is good, and she has less power, which is good. The stats that Whisper has that are higher than Miku, way heavier, so it makes it better for Whisper. And in general, since his boost is still the best stat in the game, you want to have higher boost, and you still want to have reasonably good handling, so that way, in case you were out of ring engine, or in case you get hit, or in case you want to take tighter lines, it's better to have the handling. The speed, not so much, because there's now so many speed altering gadgets. Speed weighs a little bit less, so losing a little bit of speed does hurt here, but because she has less stats and acceleration, it makes it so much better for Whisper. And Whisper is going to be obviously your best boost character easily, whereas Miku is unfortunately the worst now, which really sucks because I love Miku personally. I'd probably still keep playing Miku, but hey, Whisper's a really solid character as well. And finally, we're going to move on to the power characters. So I've been speeding through these other tiers because the power character tier is going to take a while. So let's talk about the power characters. So with Mega Man added and as the only power character of the patch, the big thing is that he has 15 boost. He is tied with a lot of characters having 15 boost. There's Patrick, there's Steve, there's Werehog, there's Dread, there's Zavok. Like, there's a lot of 15 boost characters. The big thing is, though, is that Mega Man actually has way too much power, way too little speed in relative to the other characters, and the one good saving grace is that his acceleration is actually really low, so he actually saves more points in other departments, which is weighing his stats better. But the big thing is that because he loses a boost stat compared to like Knuckles, Eggman, and Vector, while also losing 1 to 2 speed, so Mega Man only losing 1 to 2 speed does suck, and Mega Man having 1 to 2 more power on average over other characters is actually not terrible. But since speed weighs a little bit higher than power does, even with the fact that speed weighs a little bit less and power weighs a little bit more right now, in my opinion, it does hinder him a little bit. Now, the big thing is that when it comes to having the least acceleration in the class almost, he has the second lowest in the class, which is really good for him. His stats are distributed better, so it makes him a lot more consistent. Now, in terms of the other characters, if you remember from my last video talking about the best and worst characters of the game, one of the biggest things is that Eggman was the best character by far based on the old stat distribution when it came to how you weighted them. So his stats were literally so min-maxed like perfectly for the E-Gear setup with the UC and how you would weigh all the stats: boost, handling, speed, power, acceleration. He actually was the best character in the game, barely though. When it came to the weights, he was just barely higher. And I know my weights are a little off, but I think it still, like, it at least makes sense. So Eggman, shockingly, after the changes that were done to Ultimate Charge and the newly added ring engines, you will be shocked to see that Eggman is no longer on top in terms of weights. Now, there's a good reason to this. Eggman not being on top is actually specifically because of one thing that Vector has that he doesn't, and that is Vector has more power and has less acceleration. That is literally one of the biggest things that actually changes this whole weight for him, is the fact that his acceleration stat is lower than Eggman's and his power stat is higher, so it makes Vector actually overall better. This 1 speed stat for 2 power actually changes the whole dynamic for these two, and it's very, very good for Vector. Vector is able to outweigh Eggman in terms of his stat distribution, so because of that, Vector is actually going to be the best power character on the patch, specifically because of how the stats are now newly distributed. Now, if it wasn't for the fact power weighs higher, Eggman would probably still be on top, but because I'm weighing power just a smidge higher now, since bump wars are so much more prominent and so much more prevalent, it now means Vector is a more solid pick overall. And Eggman, even though Eggman's still a great character to pick, one of the big things is that Eggman does get hindered a little bit. Knuckles, as per usual, still one of the best characters in the game, easily by far when it comes to his stat distribution. One thing I would like to talk about real quick is Dread. Now, Dread is a character that has 1 less boost than Knuckles, but has 2 more power. This is something very important because instead of having that acceleration point, his points are now in power for the most part, and this allows him to actually win a lot more bump wars without having to sacrifice any of his other stats. He has actually the same stat line as Zavok, so him and Zavok actually have the exact same stat line, making them both really solid characters for this patch if you're trying to run double ring engine, and it makes it so you have more power over every character in the game, and the only other characters that match you is literally Omega. So unless you're versing a Dread player as Zavok or vice versa, or you verse an Omega player that's running double ring engine, you will actually out bump war every single player in the game as long as you're all running the same combo, which is Minecart plus Zavok, Minecart plus Dread. You will always overpower them, and that means that you're going to cause them to lose rings instead of yourself. So those are characters that are still really strong, but in terms of just weighting stats, technically Vector is still the best, but that doesn't mean that the other characters aren't good. And again, remember, just because one character is considerably the best by stat weights in quote-unquote objective math, that does not mean that they're the best for other reasons. Like Vector and Eggman, for example, and Zavok, these 3 characters, although they're very solid characters, the reason why everyone picks Knuckles and Dread more often is for visibility reasons, because Eggman, Vector, and Zavok, they're such big body characters, makes it a lot harder to actually view the road and view what's going on in the game. So because of that, Knuckles and Dread, technically, because of that, are actually better picks overall when it comes to visibility, so that's something you have to keep in mind. Again, none of these characters are bad in this class, like genuinely, none of the characters are terrible by any means. So keep that in mind. Just because Vector is quote-unquote on top does not mean Dread, Knuckles, Zavok, Mega Man, Werehog are terrible picks. You can still pick them, and they're perfectly fine. Again, if you're talking about trying to min-max the absolute maximum of every single thing you do, maybe Vector is going to be your best choice, just based on objective math. Ichiban being your worst character, I am going to be honest, this is not a surprise. Ichiban wastes 11 points in acceleration, and because of that, he sacrifices 2 to 3 boost, and sacrifices about 1 to 2 speed on average. So he's losing a ton of speed, a ton of boost, he gains a lot of acceleration, he gains a decent bit of handling, I actually think he gets the highest handling in the class, and he loses power, so his bumps are even worse, and his bump wars are worse, so he's actually getting bumped a lot more, and he's losing a lot more rings, so it makes a lot of sense why Ichiban's the worst. And then, talking about Omega real quick, Omega literally just, his stat distribution is horrible, he has the lowest speed in the class, he has the lowest boost in the class, in the middle for acceleration, because of that his stat distribution is really poor, and it makes him very prone to just getting griefed overall. It's very unfortunate because you have characters like Eggman, Vector, and Knuckles who have 16 boost, whereas you have Omega who is literally 3 boost off of these characters and on average 2 to 3 speed off, so he gets hindered quite heavily, but he barely edges out Ichiban. So in terms of the worst power character, it is Ichiban, and in terms of the best by stats alone, it is going to be Vector. Currently on the patch, based on the weights that I assume are the best, based on the current meta. Again, I could be wrong on this, but this is what I objectively think is probably the best character of each class, and the worst character of each class, specifically based on how I specifically weigh their stats, because again, I find power to be more important, I find handling to be a little less important, because having lower handling actually is more beneficial. I find that speed is not nearly as important, because there's so many more speed altering gadgets that you can actually sacrifice some speed on a character pick, so that way you can use other gadgets, and the gadgets will benefit you, even without the fact that you don't min-max on your speed stat. So again, some of these things that I find a little bit better, some things I find a little bit worse. I'd like to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Do you think these characters are the best and worst currently in the patch based on the fact that of my weights? Do you think my weights are wrong? What do you guys think? Because honestly, I think this is probably as close as you're going to get to probably the best of each class. In terms of the worst of each class, I think there's probably some nuance here. I definitely think you can make some arguments as to how I weighted all the stats. Maybe some of these characters are actually better and other characters should be on the lower end. Some of these other characters should be actually in the worst, or other characters should be in the best. Again, I would like to know what your guys' thoughts are in the comment section down below. Please let me know. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned something, and have yourselves a great one.